Good afternoon. I'm Molly Young from the Miami University Alumni Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session of Winter College 2021. For more than 17 years, Winter College has been the Alumni Association's premier alumni education event. We are so excited to be able to bring it to a broader audience this year in our virtual format. We've had an outstanding lineup over these last 2 days. You can navigate the full schedule by clicking Events by Type on the website's toolbar and selecting Winter College 2021 from the drop-down menu. Most sessions have been recorded and are posted online. Our session today is Meeting the Meaning Needs, Educating the Whole Person, K-12 through College, presented by Dr. Tammy Schwartz and panelists Jennifer Scheider, Janet Albright-Captain, and Garrett Schilling. Tammy Schwartz is the director of Miami University's Urban Cohort and a community-based approach to preparing urban professionals where faculty and students collaborate with high-need schools and community-based organizations to prepare those professionals who are grounded in the life of the community. She received her Ed.D., M.A., and B.S. from the University of Cincinnati. Jennifer Scheider is an intervention specialist at Rothenberg Preparatory Academy for Cincinnati Public Schools, over the Rhine resident, and former Urban Cohort student at Miami. Jennifer participated in the Cincinnati Summer Immersion Program in 2012 and was ultimately inspired to continue living in her beloved community of Over the Rhine after she began teaching in 2013. Jennifer is currently enrolled in Miami's Master's Program for School Leadership and will graduate in May. Janet Albright-Captain is an experienced intervention specialist teacher, youth preparatory action research facilitator, and community advocate for equity and voice. Driven by self-awareness, she takes pride in providing in both her professional and personal life pathways that lead to one's authentic self-discovery whenever possible. She earned her bachelor's degree from Xavier University, Cincinnati, and her master's of education from Antioch University in Yellow Springs. In addition to her primary job as teacher, Ms. Albright-Captain is a wife and mother of one son. Garrett Schilling is a senior microbiology major at Miami University. He has been involved in organizations such as Pi Delta Epsilon and Alpha Pi Omega. He has served as an ambassador for the College of Arts and Sciences and as a board member on the Student Advisory Board for the Mallory Wilson Center. He has also been a volunteer for our Oxford Community Hospital. His work in the Urban Cohort has been indispensable in shaping his idea of what a physician is and the responsibilities he will have one day. So with that out of the way, we can get started. Remember, audience, that you can submit questions or comments during the session by clicking the Ask a Question button below the video. Tammy, take it away.
Thank you, Molly, and welcome everyone, wherever you are joining us from, whichever time zone. In Ohio here, it is a beautiful sunny day with no snow on the ground. We're quite happy about that. So I'd like to welcome you to this session, Meeting the Meaning Needs. And I am going to share my screen here. And so I've been thinking about this phrase, meeting the meaning needs, ever since I came across it in Rabbi Michael Lerner. He's a rabbi and activist in his work, Revolutionary Love, and another book called Spirit Matters. I love to read things outside of my area and discipline to get me to think differently about my discipline. And he said, he has a critique of education and says, we're not meeting the meaning needs. And it really touched me, and I've been reflecting on this for a while. So when I had the opportunity to share at Winter College, I thought, I don't want to do this alone. I want to do this in the spirit of collaboration like we do with our program in the Urban Cohort, and invite current student Garrett, Jen, former student Janet, longtime partner in this work and community member, in having a conversation about what this means now. It goes without saying that we are in an unprecedented time, and I know that that term is even worn out right now, with a pandemic that we're going through, and also we've been facing a racial reckoning that's had its roots in our country for years, and I could show other slides of global warming impact, of the fires in California, in Australia, you name it. We're in a moment, and we're in a moment that calls us to think about, how do we live differently? How do we live differently with one another? And for me, most importantly, how do we reimagine education so that we can live differently with one another? And I really believe deeply that that involves educating the mind and the heart. I think it also involves rethinking education so that students are sitting in the director's chair of their own educational experience, whether they be K-12 students or college students. What does it look like to center the voice of a student in all of their education across all of their disciplines? What might it look like for youth to engage, whether they be youth in schools or young adults in college, to engage and use curriculum as a way to respond to inequities or issues in their community or the communities of others with whom they begin to build relationships? This work is rooted, or this journey, I should say, has started for me over 30 years ago. Yes, this is a picture of me in the back there with dark hair, not gray, of my first year of teaching in over the Rhine at a school called Washington Park Elementary. It was 6th grade. These are my students. It was the first year that they were busing children in from another neighborhood called Lower Price Hill that was predominantly white, Appalachian, and poor into over the Rhine in Cincinnati, which at that time was predominantly folks of color living in poverty. And I'll never forget one of the students who you can kind of see him in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. His name is Jimmy. He looked at me one day and he said, "Miss Tammy, I know why we're here. They just want the bad kids with the bad kids, don't they?" And my soul stopped. Hearing a child already begin to internalize incredibly toxic narratives. A toxic narrative, Black is bad. A toxic narrative of I'm bad. And if I associate with Blacks, I'm bad. Like messed up stuff. It's hard for an adult spirit to take that, for a kid to undo that internalization of that kind of narrative. And then to have that within a space where your identity as a kid in school, I'm talking particularly K-12, is connected to a test score. When we know that children and Miami students and all college students are far more than their GPA or a test score. They're incredibly complicated, gorgeous human beings with desires and to live out a purpose of their own calling. So this is where my journey began. And about 12 years or so ago, I was given the good fortune at Miami by a very visionary dean, Dr. Kareen Phaeton, to get in the curricular sandbox and put my vision that I had had for a long time into place alongside folks who are doing the work in the community. And that was to build a very place-based and community-based approach to, at the time, what was our program called the Urban Teaching Cohort. And we are now interdisciplinary, the Urban Cohort. I feel that's really important because all the issues that we're facing in our society, we cannot solve those issues within our disciplinary silos. We have got to get together across our disciplines to think creatively outside of the box. And most importantly, we at Miami cannot do that alone. We must be in relationship with our partners in deep and meaningful ways, so that we are not swooping in and swooping out. I could not put my head on the pillow at night if that were the way that we were doing things. And so we work in two predominant neighborhoods over the Rhine in Cincinnati and Lower Price Hill. And we have two partner community organizations. You see represented on the left here is Peasley Neighborhood Center in Over the Rhine. And this is the neighborhood action team with Community Matters in Lower Price Hill. The students in our program, I'll give you a quick overview from the program so you have some context, and then we'll move into some dialogue with our panelists today. So in the first year in the program, our students take a seminar in which they're really looking at systems of injustice, race, class, privilege, power, understanding more their own positionalities wherever they come from. Then they get assigned public school student mentors. Yes, they are youth, mentoring our Miami students. Youth have something to say, and we need to listen. In the process of that year, our Miami students in the Urban Cohort from all their disciplines work alongside youth on something called Youth Participatory Action Research. Actually, Janet was one of our first partner teachers in doing that work when we implemented this into our program, and has been doing it ever since at Rothenberg Preparatory Academy. And in that work, kids are they're identifying issues of concern to them and finding questions about them. What are the root causes? What are the symptoms of those issues? And they're identifying research questions, engaging in dialogue with folks about those issues. They're developing critical perspectives on what could be. They're trying to find solutions to problems. You can see here some youth presenting on trying to create an Al-Anon and an Alateen program in their community in response to the opioid crisis. In their second year, they're in an Urban Cohort community seminar that is co-taught and has been co-constructed by community folks, mamas who've been living in the neighborhood, making a way out of no way, who've got lived experience many of us could never have, and we need to honor that lived knowledge. They also have an opportunity to do a Sensei summer immersion, as we heard Jen did that in the program. And in their third year, they're assigned professional mentors. They can do our fall residency program where they're living in the community and doing work in the community and taking classes and having internships. You know, education, we've seen all these reforms over the years in education. And I think reform is different from reimagining. And I want to think about reimagining in education for the mind and the heart. Over my time in doing this work in the Urban Cohort, one of the joys of this work is watching, while our students all have their disciplinary and technical knowledge, watching their hearts transform as they begin to put on a new set of lenses and see the world in a different way. And watching the youth with whom we work do the same thing. And watch what comes out of that and how their voice and their connection and experience takes them to the next level. It's really about what Michael Lerner says, that like watching them shape for themselves and becoming parts of ongoing communities of meaning. Where's meaning in this work? David Purple, a scholar in the field of education curriculum, in a book on the moral and spiritual crisis in education, said all these reforms that we're seeing, none of them really have, quote, hardly stir us with wonder and awe. If there is a moment where we need wonder and awe and thinking about how can education contribute to that, the moment is now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Awesome. I can see my co-panelist coming up here. And with that background that I've just given you to have some context for the program, I'm gonna start us off in a dialogue here. Janet and Garrett and Jen and I have been gathering about once a week for the past month in conversation just about these issues and in preparation. And I tell you, if we had to rename this talk for today based on those conversations, it would be, "They know my story. I knew their story. I know their story." It would be about that in connection. So I'm going to start off with the first question, and I'm going to start with Garrett. Garrett, what for you does an education of the heart and the mind look like?
So for me and my experience with education, it's been a very traditional education. I went through K-12 and then even in higher education. They have done a good job of, teaching me the knowledge that I required to go further on in my educational career. But I think something that was missing through the traditional education is that I never learned how to take what I learned in the classroom and actually use that to guide my heart and kind of use my knowledge out in the world where it's going to impact real people with the compassion and the kindness that the world needs. And unfortunately, I'm not getting that, in my immunology or my physics or my biochemistry classes, but thankfully I did get it through the Urban Cohort. And just working along through the Urban Cohort has allowed me to work alongside people that have, lifted me up and introduced me to new demographics. I come from a very small town, about 2,000 people in rural Ohio, almost exclusively white. So outside, I didn't talk to anybody outside of that demographic until I got to Miami. And nothing in my education had taught me how to interact with people outside of my demographic. So I was a little scared. And joining the Urban Cohort, it scared me to death because I knew that I was going to have to engage in work that I wasn't used to, and that it was scary. But the Urban Cohort has been very it's been very vital in teaching me how to take the things that I've learned and actually use them to help people with compassion and work alongside them. And I've made mistakes along the way, but the premise of educating somebody, their heart and their head allows them to make mistakes. But the people around me have been able to lift me up, been able to teach me, and I'm definitely better for it. And I definitely wish that more people knew about the program and had more access to programs like these, because it's something that regardless of what profession you're going into, whether it's education, I'm going into healthcare, whether you're an engineering major, an architect, you need to learn how to use your heart when using the knowledge that you've learned through education.
Thanks, Garrett. Thank you. Jen, what's your heart say about a response to that question about an education for the heart and the mind?
Okay, so like it was said, I participated in the Urban Cohort and did the residency program and all of these things. And I think in the beginning, for me personally with education, I learned alongside a lot of people, just like Garrett was saying, maybe how to be more compassionate and how to care about others. One of those people is Miss Albright. I student taught with her at Rothenberg, and now we are coworkers, which is great and fun. I think the big thing to me about education of the heart and mind is you care about someone in their entirety, and not just their academics, especially as an educator. I think it is imperative that we view people as people in their entirety instead of just maybe their math score or their reading level ability. And I think through the Urban Cohort, I got to experience, and through some of my other Miami classes in undergrad, what it's like to learn about a community that you don't really know anything about. And I was in the Urban Cohort when the students who were mentors for me, I'm still pretty close with them. They're, I think, 21, 22 now. And it is really fun to learn from a kid because kids are really honest. And I think we just need to care more about other people.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks. I think that one of the things that's coming up today, as has happened in our conversations, is that notion of education of the mind and the heart has to involve some kind of connection. Yeah, thank you. Janet, what does this question mean for you? An education of the heart and the mind. What does that look like?
So for me, an education of the heart and the mind looks like, as you mentioned before, me moving back into this community, the community that I work in, and connecting with not only my students, but their families as well. So it looks like an extended family to me. It looks like one that is inviting on both sides. It looks like a gathering on a warm day, sitting out and having rich conversation with each other. And I'm talking about not only with my students, but with my parents as well. So for me, it goes beyond the four walls of the school building that I work in. It actually goes into our neighborhood. I'm not going to say this neighborhood because I live in, like I said, I live where I work at. So it goes into our neighborhood. It brings me back to a sign that I have in my classroom that says, I see you, but do you see me? Mm-hmm. And I think that is so very important when it comes to educating of the heart and the mind, is to see that person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think a lot about through our conversations and even through our work in the program of, the larger contribution of an education to a thriving democracy where there is literally justice for all, right? And so if we're doing that in a technical kind of rational way and not considering how do we build, as Garrett mentioned that word compassion, across difference so that our democracy does thrive, right? We hadn't planned this. Janet and Jen, just in particular, because you both mentioned this when you responded to this question about the heart and the mind. Why is it why do you think it's so important that you're living in the community, that you're part of the fabric of that community? What does that mean for you about that and the connection to education? I know I'm surprising them because we didn't have this as a question, but we're keeping it real, people.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, it goes back to, like I said, like the education goes beyond the walls, okay, of the school building. So for me, it means that I'm connecting with my kids at, I don't want to say their level, but at our community level. So I'm connecting with them. And by me having conversations with their parents and them seeing me have conversations with their parents, it's showing that, yes, this is what we do. This is how we do. It shows them that I'm not just the teacher that's in the classroom, but I'm also a neighbor. It allows me to, like I said before, it gives me the opportunity to become that extended family member. So a lot of times parents may need certain things and they know to call me and I don't mind that. For me, another thing is because I live so close to where I work at, to the school that I work at, I'd often walk. And on my walks coming back home, I see family members that's out and about. And one particular mother is always saying, "Hi, Miss Albright, how you doing?" And then we stop and we have those conversations. And she always tells me, well, as I'm leaving the walk, continue my walk home, "Be safe, Miss Albright." Now, her kids don't go to our school anymore, but that connection remains. And I think that for me, that's what's so important, is that connection remains.
It sounds so simple, but so many people like drive into spaces and leave for their work, right? And
yes,
so they don't have those connections in that way. Yeah. Thanks, Janet. Thank you very much. Jen, do you want to respond to that with my pop quiz question?
Yeah. So I think for me, back in undergrad, I remember specifically coming to Rothenburg to go to an 8th grade graduation. And there was kind of late. I was coming from Columbus, where I grew up. So I missed most of the graduation for Derek. But then one of his siblings, who I didn't even know was his sibling, I was staying around longer to go to CCC, which is a neighborhood art class that is free for anyone to go to. And I was waiting, and I was just sitting on the curb, and it's directly across from Rothenburg. And at the time, like, my perception, I knew about the neighborhood, but the neighborhood didn't know me. So there are people who are walking by and kind of looking at me like, when people first they see that I looked, even though I'm mixed. So the perception, I think, was that, oh, who's this woman just sitting near her? But a student goes to CC, well, used to go. His name is Santinez. He was probably 2nd grade at the time, came and sat next to me the entire time. And it was probably like an hour and a half or more while I was waiting for CCC to start. And there were people who walked by and were kind of like, "Santinez, are you good?" And just checking on him. And I think through that very first experience of just seeing how tight-knit this community is, how everyone looks out for me, just blew me away, because where I'm from, that's not the case. And even at Miami and Oxford, I think it's very, like, you just walk to class. You might see someone you know, but unless you're very, very close, you don't say hi or really even acknowledge other people on the sidewalk. Over the Rhine is not like that. It is like, hey, how are you? They know, like, people just recognize people who are around and in the community. So I think there's just like this magic of knowing people and being around, and building relationships. So Santina's is now, he was in my class when I first started teaching. He's a sophomore in high school, which blows my mind. But so his family is someone that I'm just close with that entire family. They've came over for Thanksgiving with some friends that I've had over too. Like, they have gone to Columbus with me separately, because it becomes a sibling thing, if that's fair, and how many times someone else has gone to Columbus to see my family. But I think there's just so much richness in my life that comes from living here, working here, and being here since kind of around 2013. I just think really knowing someone is so important, and staying in, just like Miss Albright was saying, of having some families who contact her. Like, I think I've learned that from Miss Albright. But it's known that, like, oh, if there's a need, it's okay to contact us. And we would much rather you contact us, good or bad, than just not telling someone. And I think that's the richness of being in community and knowing people and taking the time to know them and letting them know you too.
I'm so reminded as I'm listening to both you and Janet right now, and even Garrett talking about folks lifting him up. Anthropologist Carol Stack wrote a book years ago called All Our Kin, and about those extended networks of care that develop in neighborhoods. And so I'm just hearing that when all of you are talking right now, like this extended kin network that you're all part of in some way, shape, or form. Thank you. Thanks. So what about this brings meaning? What about this work? And when I say this work, it could be your participation in the Urban Cohort, your collaboration with us, Janet, or your role as a teacher. Jen, your work right now. Garrett, thinking about becoming a physician. What about this work brings meaning for you? And I will say to Jen and Janet, and or your students. And I'd like to start with Jen on this one. I know you just finished, but we're going to go with you, Jen.
Okay. I would say something that brings meaning to me for working here and living here, and this just being the life that is the way I live, I guess. I think specifically through the pandemic, I realized, like, wow, like, the opportunity of knowing my neighbors. So this summer I was like, oh, I need to be outside. I need patio furniture. So I borrowed one of my neighbor's vans, and I went and bought patio furniture that I don't even have yet. But I thought I needed it. I was like, okay, I'm going to go get it. So I go and pick up this furniture, and I have zero idea of how to actually put it together or even get it out of the van because it was so large. So I'm kind of struggling. I'm parked on the sidewalk, taking up a lot of room. And someone who I recognize him, like, I've seen him plenty of times in the neighborhood. But I don't know his name, but he hops out of his car. He's like, do you need help? And he called me Miss Teacher. So he knew automatically that I work at Rothenberg. So he came over and I was like, yeah, I do need help. Thank you. And we're talking, and he's asking me about Rothenberg, about if we know when schools are opening and different things. And he was like, hey, like, I remember you used to hang out with Dion's kids and you were their teacher. And I was like, yeah, like, I haven't seen them in a while. How are they? So I got to talk to him about that, and about that family and how they're doing. And then getting to have conversation with him about his job and, like, how long he's living over the Rhine and different things. So I think through this time, I've just learned everyone has a story and everyone is looking for connection. Maybe they might seem a little rough on the edges sometimes, but I think in general, there's just this sense of community here. And people I mean, he knew that I worked at Rothenberg, even though we've never had a discussion before. And he was willing to get out of his car when he was about to leave and come help me. So I think, I don't know, there's just so much, which I feel like I just said this, but there's just so much richness in living here and knowing people. And I think, I don't know, like I was blown away that day when I finally had all the things in my living room because I didn't know where to put it because it was huge. But I was just like, wow, he was kind of a stranger, even though we recognized each other, but he still realized I needed help, recognized me enough to offer help. And I don't know, I just think, how cool is it that that's the opportunity I have to know my neighbors? And technically, he's not even one of my neighbors. He just comes over and visits one of my neighbors. So I don't know. I think there's just such richness in knowing people. And I think people recognizing me and that I've been here for a while.
I think that many folks listening to you right now, Jen, are most probably a little bit jealous of the deep sense of connection that you experience with your work and living in the community there. Yeah, especially in this pandemic, like we're all really craving connection, but how important that is, like, you know, and how can we foster education to even further do that? And so that you're there doing that work is pretty cool. Janet, I'm going to turn to you next. What about this work brings meaning for you and your students, or your students?
Yes. So as Tammy had mentioned earlier, I am part of the YPAR, and so my students act as mentors to the Miami students. For me, going through the process of YPAR with my students and just watching them go through that process, watching them exercising their voice, a voice probably that they did not realize that they could exercise it in a way that they're exercising it. Okay. And just listening to their conversations, watching them problem solve on issues that they have identified that they would like to address, whether it be action or just researching and getting more information about it. Seeing them go through this process, and the school that I work at is an elementary school. So seeing them go through that process, and I know that Tammy mentioned earlier, like planting a seed, because the joy that I get is that as they move into high school, they want to continue this work. They want to continue that process. And to me, there's no greater joy as a teacher, as an instructor, to see a student using their strong voice for change. And it starts with, as I was saying earlier to the group when we had a conversation, it starts with change with yourself, advocating for yourself. And these students have those tools to know how to advocate for themselves. High school it can be challenging for a lot of students. And having that tool to going in gives them a great opportunity, and then using it to further their education, to further their learning. And I'm not just talking about the academics or the curriculum that's within the school. I'm talking about life education for them, things that are happening around them, sometimes things that are happening to them.
Yeah.
And being able to use their voice and, you know, make awareness that they know and that change needs to come. So
you talk about, Janet, that this is meaningful for your students and for you because of them exercising their voice in this process and of doing youth participatory action research, and they're continuing it on in high school. Can you give an example for our listeners out there of maybe one example of the YPAR work that your youth did in the community?
Well, one well, I can give you a couple of examples actually.
Pick
So,
one. Yeah.
yeah, I know. One example that we did, we did a informational march. So the kids wanted to do an informational march. They identified some issues that they thought that they wanted to address within the neighborhood, poverty, housing, um, equity in, and so they formed together. They learned some songs from way back when, freedom marching songs from way back. So they had a little pushback on it at first because it wasn't like modern day songs. But once they learned the songs, they went out and we went around our neighborhood, and they had the opportunity to provide information to people who was listening, who was listening or who they didn't think was listening, but they was providing that information. And they felt so empowered by doing that.
Mm.
So empowered. And I'm quite sure if we said that they could walk around the neighborhood 10 times, they would have done it 10 times. That's just how into what they were doing they were. One other quick little thing, this group that I'm talking about are actually seniors this year, so they're about to graduate. Yes.
Wow.
One of the other things that this particular group did was they held a town hall meeting with the president at the time of the Over the Rhine community. And I remember one of the questions that they posed to him was, why aren't there any youth representatives on the panel, on the board? And that was one thing that this particular president said he could not answer, but he wanted to make a change so there would be some representation of youth on the Over the Rhine Community Council board. So that's another example.
Yeah. Watching the civic capacity of youth, and it again brings us back to that talk about meaning. These things are meaningful. Where do we give them space? Because they've got it, right?
Yes.
They've got it. We all agree they've got it. Where do we give them space within formal and non-formal education to exercise that? Yeah. I actually have goosebumps as you were sharing that story again, Janet. Thank you. And thanks for sharing that. So the folks viewing today kind of had a little more context for that. Yeah, awesome. Garrett, we're going to shift from a K-12 perspective into college now with you, going back to that. What about this work? And I guess for you, it would be our urban cohort work. What about this brings meaning for you?
Yeah, so I'll define like the work, I guess, is what I do with the urban cohort, and also what I will be doing as a physician later on, going through med school and then completing my training. And the work is being able to serve communities that I feel that I have a connection with. And I never thought that I would have a connection with Cincinnati when I came to Oxford, but working there from my freshman year all the way till now my senior year, I've worked with the kids there and I've worked with the adult community members there, and I do feel a real sense of connection there. And doing this work, with them, it makes me one of the only parts of my life. It really makes me feel like a human. And I think that's extremely important because, going to my classes through college, I'm always waiting to get them over with so that I can go on and do the things that I want to do, which is really, connecting with people and helping them through, tough times in their lives. And so being able to do that work with them and being able to feel, the raw emotion that they give off, whether it's working with my YPAR students, our project was bullying in the school. And so, listening to some of the things they said, they get it. they understand the problems, and some of the ideas they came up with, I wouldn't have ever came up with. and then working with the community members and, hearing the raw emotional stories that they were telling, it makes you feel human. It makes you feel connected to them. And just working with the Urban Cohort, something that has been, extremely helpful to me is that it's really cultivated my emotional intelligence. Something that I don't think, education otherwise would have done for me. There's no there's no part of my classes in college that have really helped me reflect and, deal with the emotions that I have. I was never good with my emotions. I've never was good at, feeling them, understanding them, reflecting on them. And there was one time specifically through the Urban Cohort, we have a retreat every semester at the Peasley Neighborhood Center, and Over the Rhine is kind of, our, home base for the Urban Cohort in Cincinnati. And each semester we have a theme, and this theme for this resort or this retreat was, self-care. And one of the very impactful things that we did there was that we made a box and we wrote down things that we were insecure about, things that we didn't like in ourselves, things that we didn't like in the world, things that we were scared of, things, that we feared of the future. And, that made me strip down who I was to, just, the individual that I truly am. And I don't think that education does that enough. I don't think it gives us the opportunity to do that. But I think it's extremely important. And the two people next to me were, crying as they were doing it. And I felt this emotion that to this day I still can't describe, but it was just this feeling of lightness after I got done with this. Being able to deal with my emotions is definitely going to help me becoming a physician. I'm going to be there when people are, going through the worst day of their life, and I'm going to have to sit down with them and walk side by side with them through, whatever illness or disease they're going to have to deal with. And without the emotional capacity to do that, I don't think I would be able to serve my patients in the community that I'm going to work in as best as I could.
Thank you, Garrett. One of the things that you just reminded me of is when we think about education, we think, a lot of times, was a very famous educator, Paulo Freire, was a literacy educator in Brazil, and he talked about education as being that could be a banking system. You just deposit the coins, I eat them, I take them in, it's whatever, but there's another kind of education that's about understanding deeply the world and ourselves, reading not only the word, but the world in all of its complex context and overlapping context. And I think that, that the kind of education I think that transforms us is the kind that makes us step into our fear and our vulnerabilities. That kind of, you said that raw stuff, like it ain't fair for a community member to be raw if we're not willing to get raw ourselves, right? Yeah, I see everybody's head shaking on this one. We've got to be in that space together. And I think that, I think back to, my own days as a public school teacher. How do we then create, and I know that this term is used a lot, like safe spaces, but how do we create spaces that nurture an environment where vulnerability and fear and stumbling and struggling and being in the mess of trying to figure it out, where that's honored. I mean, I know so many times in this work, from my perspective, when I'm teaching and we're getting into some difficult conversations about things, even in conversations I've had with you all sometimes too, I've been like, oh God, did I just say that? Did I do that? And I've got to sit with my own uncomfortableness. Or if I'm working with a student, sometimes it's like a dance. All right, you're having struggle right now with that, sit in your struggle, and I just let you alone. And other times it's like, okay, come on, baby, put your arm around, so it's that dance of that. But I think I really appreciate you bringing up that notion of vulnerability. And also too, the word that you used when you were talking about, is it doing the work with? I think that term with is so important, because with removes this, I have power and you don't have power, right? And I think this work is about recognizing that we all have power, and how do we share that for a common good? Yeah. Cool. Okay, I have one last question before we can open it up for some Q&A, and I hope we have some questions out there. I'm sure some of you might even want to hear about what's happening with COVID in the schools a little bit more with the students and that, so I want to leave time for that. So, I opened up our slides in the beginning of this with, we're in a moment, right? We're in a moment like at least I've not seen before. And it's reflective of a lot of history. And here we are. And so we're in that messiness. We have an opportunity to stay in the struggle, to not close our eyes, to not go back to our old way of doing things, but to see things disrupted in a healthy way for transformation. So my question to you all is, what does this moment need for education to become so that we have transformation, so that we all can live in community differently with one another for the good of our communities, our families, our country, our democracy? That's just a small question. No problem. I'm actually going to start with Janet on this one.
Okay, so the pandemic, I hope, has taught us that the way that we was doing education, we need to change. It's not the way that we should move forward. We shouldn't continue in the manner that we were doing before we came into this pandemic. I've been wrestling a lot with the notion that that we should move into more so that we have an opportunity, I should say, to move into a student-led learning, where the student is telling the teacher or giving information to the teacher or sharing with the teacher what their struggle is, what do they need help in, them identifying the area that they may not be quote unquote proficient in, that they may need more help in. And I think that by doing that, it empowers the student, number one. It gives that student the opportunity to say, hey, I see something in me. I know that there's something in my learning that is not right, and I need it to be fixed. I want you to be, as the teacher, to be a partner with me to figure out how. Let's do this plan as you being the partner to do this so we can get this right. And I think that when we look at curriculum in the school now, the curriculum is a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
It doesn't ask the child or that student, are you okay with this? Do you know where we're at? Do you know what we're talking about? It says, hey, we're on a pace. You better keep up. I can't worry that if you are not getting it, we're on a pace. You need to keep up with it. And I think that is so that is, well, it's wrong. It's wrong for the kid on all different levels, for a child on all different levels, as far as their education. And I really do believe that a child knows what they need as far as learning. I've been in a lot of conversations as being an intervention specialist with kids that can identify, hey, I struggle in this area. I struggle in this area. Right now in my classroom, we're doing, my kids are setting up their plan, do, act, study. So they're identifying something that they want to work on. And then they're coming up with a plan for how they're going to do it. And then we're going to study it. And then the action comes with, did it work? You know? Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't, then we go back and then we refigure out what do we need to do to change it. And by them taking a hold of that, by them making that realization, then they're more inclined to work on it to improve it.
And I think even that spirit of an environment set up where it's okay to not be great. It's okay.
It's very much so.
It's okay to not know something. It's
Very
okay
much
to
so.
not master. It's like
Mhm.
when we put such high stakes, I think, and I've seen this with students we've worked with, like it instills this sense of fear. And I've
Mhm.
always said, nothing good comes from fear.
Mhm.
Nothing good comes from fear. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thanks, Janet. Jen, in the K-12 perspective, you want to follow up with that, and then we'll have Garrett share his perspectives, and then we'll open it up for some questions.
Yes. So when Ms. Allwright was talking about curriculum, I just was like, yes, that is exactly. I think there's so much focus on where people need to be, and not enough focus on where they're at. And then also asking them where they want to go. So when she was saying that, I just agreed completely. I think right now there's so much happening in the world that I think there's a focus of just pretend it's not happening and just keep going. Like, well, you still got to get through this pace in math, so just keep going. No matter if we're in remote learning via Google Meet or if we're in person 2 days a week. And I think that is a disservice. So to me, I think a practical thing we can do right now is just to have real conversation with kids and be like, how are you? So when we were remote learning, we would have office hours, and I would have students join my office hours, but just to talk and to hang out, not to really work on things unless they had real questions. But one of my favorite moments was I had a couple students join one day, and they were like, can we make paper airplanes? I was like, I have no idea how to make a paper airplane, but sure. And so it turned into this one student teaching two of us, teaching me how to, like, step by step fold the paper airplanes. And then we would take a turn, and he would be like, okay, turn your computer. So I would turn my computer, throw it in my classroom, and then he would hold his computer and throw his out one of his windows. And we probably made 6 or 7 of them. And I just think right now we have the opportunity to be around more people virtually, and just take the time. Like, we could have been working on math. He could have used working on math time with me, but it was important to just have that connection. And he got to teach me something that I literally have no idea how to make a paper airplane. Couldn't even tell you what to do now, even though he did. So probably not a good student. But I think another thing with all the race stuff that is happening, I think we really need to listen to kids. We really need to value their voice. One of the students who was on one of the pictures earlier is a student I'm still really close with. His name is Aishan. And this summer, when George Floyd was murdered, we went to different rallies. His mom texted me and said, hey, are you going to any of these? I can't go. Can he go with you? I was like, I am going. Yes, he can come. And like I mentioned earlier, people don't know that I'm mixed, so they don't see that in me unless we end up having that conversation. But when they see Aishan, it's an automatic, you are a young Black man, and certain people will automatically feel threatened by that in him. And then having these conversations with him around race and around the perception that people have of him that is not deserved at all. I think with that, like, there's just so many things that we can't pretend aren't happening just because it might be uncomfortable. And that is the same with education. It might be uncomfortable to change curriculum. It might be uncomfortable to say, hey, what is it something you want to learn? Or what is something you think you need to grow in? Because as a teacher, we're supposed to know all these things. And it might be uncomfortable to give kids and students power in that. But just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean we don't do it.
Right. Thank you, Jen. Thanks. Garrett, you want to bring us out with this one from a higher ed perspective?
Yeah, so as you know, some of the people that are listening to Janet and Jen's take on what education should be. It might sound weird to them, and it sounds, weird to me. The student teaching the teachers, young people teaching older people, and the only reason that it sounds weird to us is because we have this definition of what education is, and so I think what education needs is a redefining. And I've been fascinated with this notion of definition because, you have moments that define movements, and our perception of what something is its definition. And so what education needs is somebody to come along, or a group of people, the teachers, the students, they need to redefine what education is. I look at it like, as an example, from a healthcare perspective, I think that our definition of healthcare is too narrow. So for me, as a physician, it makes sense that if I can prescribe a medicine for some symptom, that I can also prescribe affordable housing. I could also prescribe healthy foods. I could prescribe, access to cooking classes, so you know how to cook nutritious foods. I should be able to prescribe you a car service that will pick you up and drop you off to the medical clinic, so that you can get the healthcare services that you need. And the only reason that sounds crazy to people is that because that doesn't fit into our definition of healthcare. So I think that education has that same problem, is that when you hear somebody saying that, the student should be, teaching the teacher, it doesn't sound right, because that's not what the current definition of education is. But it's going to take a group of people to redefine what education is. And, Jen and Janet, they are teachers, so they have more experience in that field than I do. But I understand that the way education is happening now, and the way I went through education, it's might not be the best way. And so I think to move forward, we have to create our own definition of what education should be. And I think a good start is flipping the notion of who's teaching who and what should we be teaching. Yeah, and I'll leave off with one of my favorite quotes from James Baldwin, which is, not everything that is acted upon can be changed, but nothing can be changed if it's not acted upon. So, these things are scary, they're big. We don't know if we can change them, but we're never going to know if we don't try. So.
Wow, Garrett, you just dropped the mic right there. I was going to share a quote, but I'm going to leave it at that. I know we just have about a few minutes there, Molly. I'll turn it back over to you. And just Janet and Jen and Garrett, incredibly grateful for you, and have enjoyed our conversations in this one as well. And I hope all you out there have enjoyed it as much as I have.
Oh, thank you all. This conversation and your perspectives are super valuable, very informative. I hope our audience has enjoyed it today. We do have some questions. I'm going to try to hurry up and lump them together. Okay. Is the Urban Cohort program available to students in all disciplines at Miami? Sort of like Garrett is doing, pairing the Urban Cohort experience with another major.
Yes, it is. It's an add-on set of experiences, courses, and seminars designed to be interdisciplinary now. And actually, I forgot to mention that our students now earn a certificate for going through the program called Fostering Just Community Certificate.
Excellent. All right.
And we have all kinds of majors.
Great. And is it a 4-year endeavor, or is this just isolated to some semesters?
It is a 3-year endeavor.
Excellent. All right. Well, I do appreciate you all joining us today. And I wish we could get to many more questions, because I actually have a few of my own, and there are a couple others. But this has been a really great presentation. And unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you, Tammy, Janet, Jen, Garrett, for your participation today. We really appreciate you being with us. And so our viewers know that our last Winter College session is Date Night In, Cooking at Home with Lee Barnhart Ox, class of 83. It starts at 5 o'clock, promptly right on the heels. Please feel free to join even if the session has just already started. Again, there are unique URLs for each session, so please refer to your registration confirmation email for the links to each presentation, or by clicking Events by Type on the website's top toolbar and selecting Winter College 2021 from the drop-down menu. On behalf of the Miami University Alumni Association, we thank you for joining us. Love and honor to you all.